right, we've made it. Win Google Tag Manager Retargeting, Lesson 1, Retargeting Foundations. Welcome. If some of you might be new to some of these trainings, so this is the way that it works. You will see the lesson kind of broken down in different topics. Not too many topics on today's lesson by design, but we'll break it down different topics, and you'll see me sort of pause as I go through. That's just so our video editor can break it out into the student editions for all of you Academy members that we go through as well. The Q&A at the very end of this, there will be a Q&A. So we're going to do the content portion first, just kind of going over the foundational stuff for this particular one. Then we'll come back and open it up to questions that anybody has, which we will certainly go through. If you have a question, you can pop them in chat as you have them if you are here live watching. If you are an Academy member watching the replay, you can just drop the questions into Ask an Instructor support. So that's where those should go as well. For the first lesson of the wins, we do allow the stream to go to YouTube, to our public channel, but unfortunately we can't offer support for that. So that is just for Academy members. So if you're watching on YouTube and you're watching this particular free lesson, this one particular one, there isn't that option. But again, for Academy members, Ask Instructor support. The schedule. So, of course, today we are talking about retargeting foundations. So we're going to be going through this. The second lesson will be at this exact same time. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about building out the plan and playing out retargeting. So today we're going to talk about just sort of the basics of retargeting, and then we'll go into and how to think about it. This will be building out the specifics as we go through, and then it's going to move on from there into actually retargeting. So we'll set up Facebook first, and we'll show you how to do that, then Google Ads after that, because those are the primary two platforms. If you know how to do those, you can figure out everything else. And then we'll talk about how to measure performance. Just as a reminder, on Fridays, everything's at this same time, but on Fridays, it's here. It's at 3 p.m. Eastern. That is our normal time for Fridays trainings, but just making sure that everybody knows it is different. So 3 p.m. Eastern on Friday. And again, the YouTube version is the free version. We're allowing retargeting foundations just for our YouTube audience. That is just for lesson 1. Everything else is for Academy members. So we'll be able to go from there. All right. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get officially started. Win Google Tag Manager Retargeting. This is lesson number 1, Retargeting Foundations. Now, we're going to bring up the, as we should, and as you always should, you should know this by heart, hopefully, at this point. If you're moving into learning how to do Tag Manager retargeting, it means you already know Tag Manager, because you cannot learn how to do retargeting unless you actually know how to use Tag Manager as a tool. So you should already have some experience with that. But we want to bring up the framework itself, the measurement marketing framework, because it is important to understand how retargeting comes into play and where the different platforms for retargeting, specifically Tag Managers, 2 different platforms, can come into play as well. So remember, we're all marketing in the blind when we start. We're trying to get to the point where our marketing efforts are producing reliable, consistent, something we can count on, profit and results, right? Profit and revenue from this. So how do you do that? You plan, you build, and you launch. So in the planning process, we talk about questions we're trying to answer, the information we need to collect in order to get the answers. Obviously, Tag Manager comes into play when it comes to collecting information. And then, of course, the actions we're going to take based upon the answers we get. And we sort of role play the whole thing. And that builds out our overall measurement plan, of which retargeting will become an eventual part of that. In the build process, we got to make sure our measurement platform, whatever we're using, we obviously specifically stick with mostly the Google stuff, but you got to make sure the results are being measured, which is the ACE sort of stuff we talk about, awareness goals, and the completion goals, and the engagement stuff. And then the traffic, the who, what, and why, and then the story, the setup. Now, a lot of the retargeting stuff will happen in here, in that story step, because you already have, ACE goals set up in a lot of cases, and you already have the traffic UTMs coming in. And those help you to retarget different audiences that you're coming through. So again, that's where that story comes from. Once you have that in place, then of course you can listen to the conversation. We can actually understand the conversation the users are having with our site, or the site is having with their users. We can then measure and get our benchmarks and forecast using those benchmarks, so we know what our near future is going to be based upon our past, recent, present. Then we measure against our forecast. That's what tells us where to optimize. And of course, that's the thing that everybody's always trying to do, but that's a natural thing that will be very easy to figure out once you follow the framework in all of its glory. And you do it over and over and over again. Remember, the framework's not a one and done thing. You're going to use this hundreds or thousands of times as you go through. It's just how measurement is done. And if you do it in this order, in this specific way, you will find the whole thing gets a whole lot easier. Now, with, of course, all of our trainings and specifically these WIN courses, we talk about the one thing, always that one thing, because it's really easy to get overwhelmed and frustrated by this stuff. And the measurement in itself is a fire hose of information that is constantly changing in terms of how much water is coming through that fire hose and at what pressure that water is coming through. And generally speaking, it goes one of two directions. I mean, the fire hose just gets bigger and it gets more pressure, it's faster. So that's what's going to happen. And with the one thing concept, the reason that that's here is to help protect you from that, because you cannot drink from the fire hose. It's not going to work. So when we break these things out, we break them out into little specific things that you can take. Maybe it's something you've heard in a slightly different way. Maybe it's a new skill you can practice. But whatever it is, you take that one thing and you integrate it into your system. You actually start using that one thing. Then you build a muscle with that. Then you come back, rewatch this. You will pick up another new one thing. That's how all of our trainings work. Now, specific to this lesson, there's a couple of topics we're going to focus on. First is rethinking retargeting, so that we can sort of change probably how you're thinking about it. Because I think a lot of people have a generic understanding of how retargeting is based upon what they know that is possible. But of course, as measurement marketers, it's a whole new world. So we're going to talk about rethinking retargeting in the world of measurement marketing. And then we're going to go into the tools specifically that you will be using to do this and why this is so important as we organize it. Because if you don't consider this stuff ahead of time, you're just going to jump in and set up kind of everyday normal retargeting, and that's not it's okay, but that's not really fulfilling on the promise of retargeting. So we're going to talk about that as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and jump right in, and we're going to start first with our first topic, lesson 1, topic 1, rethinking retargeting. We'll see you there. W.I.N Google Tag Manager continues lesson 1 with our first topic, rethinking retargeting. So this is my favorite way of thinking about retargeting. I try, and this is not just with retargeting, truly, this is with measurement in general, and really with digital marketing. I think about it in an offline sense. I always try to figure out what would this be like in the offline world, in the analog world, in the world where we weren't having pixels and clicks and buttons and everything else. But how would a normal business do this, right? The business that was back in the 80s and the 70s, like how did they do all this stuff? So if I had a shoe store, or you had a shoe store, and you've got somebody that comes into that shoe store and they're like, listen, I'm trying to get my bike repaired. And there used to be a bike repair shop here. Maybe that's true. Let's pretend for a second that it is. So what you would do is you would say, oh yeah, sorry, they moved locations. We opened a shoe store up last week or last month or whatever it was. And now they're across the street, and you point them over to the bike shop that is now there. And that is it. So they go and they get their bike repaired. Now in the offline world, that would be the end of it. It makes perfect sense to have that conversation. It's a quite normal conversation. No harm, no foul. Somebody came in the wrong building, went to the wrong place. You helped them out. They're happy. You're happy. We're all good. However, in the digital world, what would happen is if I had a shoe store website and somebody came into that site accidentally trying to get someplace else, and then they find that someplace else, what's that website, that shoe site going to do? The shoe store is going to come out and say, hey, now that you're done fixing your bike, are you sure you want to buy some shoes? Then, if it's really advanced, it's going to wait a period of time. And then it's going to ask him again, hey, I know you were interested in shoes at one point, so would you like to buy some shoes now? And then if it's really advanced, it waits even more time. Then it comes back and says, okay, now you must be into shoes, so let's go ahead and buy some shoes now. You can buy some of my shoes. And this is the problem with retargeting as it is. It is the reason that this happens is because it is so easy to set up retargeting, but because it was so easy, nobody really thought about it. And because nobody really thought about it, there are consequences of our behaviors as marketers. This is what we did this to ourselves. The reason we are in this data privacy nightmare is in large part because of retargeting, and because retargeting just went off the rails. Nobody was really paying attention to anybody. Everyone's trying to do the money grab. It works, but there's a lot of collateral damage. And that collateral damage was privacy, was people being followed around and bugged for shoes that they don't really need because the marketing teams never leveled up their performance enough to think about retargeting to target a conversation instead of a specific generic behavior like walking into a store. And this is the part of this that I want you to focus on when you think about your retargeting, especially because you're a measurement marketer, especially because you have tools that can allow you to do this, that you have to level up your thought around this. So we need to retarget behaviors that are happening on the site, right? Behaviors that are happening on the site. Not showing up at your store is not a behavior. Like, okay, technically, generically, I get it. It is, but not really, right? Let's talk about this one. This is a famous one. You got to set up retargeting for abandoned carts. I get that. I understand it. Believe me, I hear you. And I'm like, well, that makes sense. Of course, if they come to the cart and they leave, I would be able to retarget them the messages that says, hey, did something get in the way? Hey, you left these items in your cart. That works for me all the time. And it probably does. I get that. However, there are different ways to abandon a cart. Just like there are different ways to walk into a shoe store. Sometimes you walk in a shoe store to buy shoes. Sometimes you walk in a shoe store because you're trying to get to a different store that used to be there and you didn't realize it. Or you're just asking for directions someplace else. And so what matters is not that they walked into the shoe store. What matters is the conversation that happened when they walked into the shoe store, right? That's the behavior we're trying to measure for them. This is what the beauty of measurement marketers are, is that you can do that with the tools. So when you think about abandoned cart, it could be this. Maybe this is what you've done. This is the easy one. This is the one that everybody was taught to set up in the beginning. Is you go to Facebook, you open up your Facebook. You don't even have to do anything with Tag Manager or anything else. You just tell Facebook when they see this cart page, but they did not see the thank you page, retarget them all the time for 45 days, right? Or however long Facebook would let you. And that's what happens. And then, granted, that does sell some things, right? That does work. However, there's a lot of collateral damage there. There's a lot of messaging that's going to people who do not need to see that messaging, and it's not super efficient, but it is technically retargeting, right? It does that abandoned cart purchase. It's the one that you probably are doing now. Like, this is where everybody starts, is that. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they came to the cart to purchase. It doesn't mean they came to the cart to purchase at all. For example, think about these behaviors, and this is what I mean by behaviors. They see the offer page for 10 seconds, then they go to the cart for 5 seconds, then they exit on that page. That's a very different conversation than somebody who saw the offer page for 45 seconds, whatever that offer page is, a regular sales page or a product detail page, whatever it is. Then they visit the cart and they start filling out fields and then they exit. It's two completely different behaviors going on, right? This one in particular, is kind of a scanning behavior. There's real no level of big interest there. And even if there was, it's not going to be like a 20% off coupon is going to necessarily get them back. Maybe that's not the best way to get them back because they were only on the offer for 10 seconds. Like, they're kind of clicking through going, yeah, maybe this is too expensive, and they move on. You got to build value someplace else. Maybe you can change the messaging to say, hey, here's what others have done. Use some social proof, right? Actually change the conversation. You change your marketing. Just like if you were physically in front of somebody and you saw that sort of behavior when they were this quickly walk through the shoe store very quickly, and they don't see anything, you would stop them. What are you looking for? You're probably looking for something that we don't have or that you don't know that we have, but you couldn't find it, and I can direct you to it. Versus a behavior like this, where they are exploring, they're spending some time, maybe they're clicking on videos or looking at certain testimonials because you can level this thing up. We'll show you that stuff as we go through this particular course. And then they visit and they start interacting with it, but for some reason they decide to leave. Now, that could have been because your form was too complicated. It could have been because it was technically broken and it just didn't work. It could have been because they need to use the restroom, or it was lunchtime, or they have a child that came in and interrupted them. They had to go. It could have been a million different things. But then your retargeting messages could theoretically change because now you know somebody was showing some real true behaviors that were leading down that conversion path, and then something interrupted them, probably, right? You make an estimated guess. But at the very least, it's a different message that you would send to them. But you wouldn't send this generic, here's a 20% off coupon to everybody, because when you're doing it like this, abandoned cart, like that. Oops, sorry. Let me go back. I went a little too fast. When you're doing this, just views the cart page, doesn't purchase, you have no clue what's going on. You have no clue why they abandoned cart. You don't even know if they were interested. So you're just to try this sort of Hail Mary type messaging, one message that works for everybody. But you don't have to do that. This person can get a totally different message than this person can. But that only happens if you measure for those different responses, those different behaviors. And of course, if you know those different behaviors, that's when you need to go tell the ad platforms, adjust your messaging to change the conversation, right? This is the whole concept of measurement marketing. The fact that there's a conversation going on between the website and the users. Measurement is how we listen to their side of the conversation. Marketing is what we adjust to keep the conversation going. But you can only adjust the conversation to the level that you are measuring. So if you have very generic style measurement set up, you're not going to be able to have a nuanced conversation. It'll always be like, buy now. How about now? Can you buy now? Maybe now you'll buy. Maybe now you'll buy. But if you actually measure for certain behaviors, which this course will help you with, you can start to realize the nuances that are there, and you can measure for the certain nuances that are there. You can handle certain objections on their own because you're going to know the better than average chance that you have that objection because that's what those behaviors are showing. And of course, we'll talk more about that in the actual planning process. But the very first topic, the very first thing we wanted to cover here was that concept of rethinking retargeting. Because I think everybody thinks, and I understand why, is that it's just, the cart demand is a perfect example because it's the cliche. They come to the cart, they don't buy, therefore make them another deal to get them to come back. And it does work. Net, you'll make some sales out of that. It's a good place to start. But it's not the level that a measurement marketer can do, because eventually you want to really measure not just did they see the cart and leave, but why? Why did they do it? What's the conversation in their head? And if I was a salesperson, how would it be adjusting the conversation to keep the conversation going the right way? That's the power of true retargeting when it comes to measurement marketing. So with that, we will wrap up our first topic. Should start with this slide. With that, we will wrap up Lesson 1, Topic 1, Rethinking Retargeting. Coming up next, Lesson 1 continues with Topic number 2, and we're going to go into the different tools that are available when it comes to retargeting and some of the ones you might get exposed to. Some of them you're going to need now, some of them you may or may not need in the future, but we're going to talk about those in the second topic. We'll see you there. W.I.N Google Tag Manager Retargeting continues Lesson 1 with our final topic, the tools. All right, now we're just going to go ahead and dive right in to my favorite teaching tool, which is Lucidchart. And we'll talk about some of the tools that you're going to come across in the world of retargeting. So I'm going to assume at this point that you're already using Tag Manager. You shouldn't be watching a Tag Manager course all about retargeting unless you are, of course, using Tag Manager. For Academy members, it means you should be going through the W.I.N Google Tag Manager Basics, and ideally, you have already gone through W.I.N Google Tag Manager Beyond Basics. Now, remember, before I talk about other tools here, though when I say go through that, I do not necessarily mean you've just watched those, because if you just watched them, you've been exposed to that information, which is awesome, but you were drinking from the fire hose a little bit. The only way to get away from drinking the fire hose is practicing this stuff. So if you are not yet familiar with different types of triggers and everything from clicks to element visibility to time to trigger groups, practice that stuff first before you're going to get anything more from this, because those skills, those muscles that you develop in those courses is what you're going to use here, right? It's what you're going to use here, because retargeting doesn't have to be that hard. It's a strategy. You just have to think about it a little different. Okay, so let's talk about the other tools that we're going to be using. Now I'm going to pull up, of course, the basic ones. So let's go through and we'll pull up, let's see, Tag Manager. And then we're going to pull up the other Tag Manager, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. So I'm going to do first Tag Manager. Computer's crawling for some reason. It's never a good sign. All right, so let's bring out Tag Manager. And then there is, I'm just going to pull up an image of a server, because there is now server side, which we have a course on W.I.N Google Tag Manager server side, not at all required for this, but I want to talk about it so we understand sort of how this works. I'm just going to pull up an icon for a server. Shape then, we'll use a shape. All right. This will work. Okay. And I apologize. I do not know what's going on with my computer right now, but it is crawling. All this tech. Obviously affecting a few things. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to try to see if there's anything else that I can't shut down. Which it does not look like is possible. So we're going to have to deal with this. All right. That's why the editor gets to take all this stuff out in post. Okay, so thank you, Vince, by the way, for doing that. So we've got Tag Manager here. Now, Tag Manager itself, let's shrink this down a little bit. So Tag Manager itself is going to sit, and again, you should already be using this. So we're not going to, this is definitely, absolutely not going to be a how to use Tag Manager course at all. You should already have skills for that. but this is specifically for the website, right? The web version of GTM. So the JavaScript sits on top of your server and it's listening for all the different behaviors that are coming through. And then you've got the server side edition of Tag Manager. So I'm just going to drag this over here. This is obviously servers, stacked of servers, but we're going to pretend this is just server side Tag Manager. So whether or not you're using Tag Manager, just the web, or you're using the server side where you're running your own measurement server. And again, if you don't know what that means, it's not at all necessary to set this stuff up, but eventually you might, right? At this point, it costs money. It's a substantial level up in terms of skill set that you'll be needing with server side, but it is absolutely something you'll probably want to take a look at. You've got Tag Manager and you've got the server side Tag Manager. So no matter what, you should have Tag Manager experience no matter what. The reason that we're trying to use these tools is because we are communicating with these other platforms like Facebook, like Google Ads coming through. So let me see if I can pull this over. Holy cow, this thing is crawling. I apologize for the delays here. And if this continues substantially longer, I'm not going to be able to teach this. I'm going to have to restart. I apologize for that. I think it's because I went from one call to the other without a break in between, and it's getting all sorts of confused. In fact, I know exactly what's going on. Let's try this. I bet you, because I went from one call to another, that my other call is trying to render itself in the background, taking up all of my system resources, which is what's causing my issues, I believe. Okay, let's try that. So, no, that's not it. Man, I apologize. This is going to be rough, I think. I'm going to try one other quick thing. Let's see if this pings, just gets us a little bit faster. Bring over Google Ads. It's a little bit faster. Okay, things are starting to free up a little bit. So we'll work with this. Okay, so we've got Tag Manager, whether you're using Tag Manager website, whether you're using Tag Manager server side, it doesn't really matter. The whole point of Tag Manager is there to collect behaviors, right? It is a platform built to measure for any sort of behavior that's happening on the site. If they're clicking on images, Tag Manager can tell you. If they're loading certain pages, Tag Manager can tell you. If they've purchased something, Tag Manager can tell you. If it's a lead, Tag Manager can tell you. Did they watch the video? Tag Manager can tell you. Did they scroll down halfway through and spend 45 seconds on your page? Tag Manager can tell you, right? That's what it's for. It's incredible at that. What's happening right now is back in the day, right, in the brute force days, and remember, there are real consequences of the brute force retargeting that everyone's done, because it's basically upset everybody so much that you've got laws like GDPR, that you've got what's going on with third-party cookies going away, that you've got users blocking everybody to any possible way they can using browsers like Brave and extensions and everything else. This is why. So there's real consequences on this. We've already suffering those consequences, so we cannot undo what has been done. However, we do have to level things up a little bit. Back in the day, Tag Manager, if you were using Tag Manager for retargeting, it was just based on page views, right? Saw the cart, didn't see the purchase page, therefore tell Facebook to pester them until they buy. So this is what the rules have basically been. And then maybe you're using Google Ads too, and you tell both those platforms to pester them until they buy, right? So that happens, and I get that it does make money, but there's a lot of collateral damage that we're all dealing with now because of that sort of stuff. So what do we do? What do we do in this new world when it comes to using these tools? The whole thing that's starting to happen right now with data, and this is a huge trend that will continue through 2022 and 2023 certainly, is that there's two things going on with data. One is you hear all this stuff about first-party data. So I'm going to pull up a little text block here. Actually, let's do this. We'll do a little shape. So first-party data is the first thing. And this is what happens when I type too fast. First-party data. And then second thing that's going on is a flight to quality, which is completely different than what it used to be when we were back in the brute force days of it doesn't matter, just tell everybody everything and then let the algorithms sort it out. That used to be the rule. Let the algorithms sort it out. The algorithms cannot sort stuff out anymore. So now they need quality data. So first party is data that you own, and quality, because you own it, because we're actually in charge of our measurement a little bit more than we were before, we can actually have a higher quality. These two things are because of Tag Manager. Tag Manager allows that. So you can do the first-party data stuff with server-side if you need to do that. But even if you didn't, it's still okay. You can still get a lot done, which is regular Tag Manager, the web version of it, specifically the quality data. Because these platforms, Facebook and Google Ads, specifically Facebook, and anybody's familiar with iOS and the kerfuffle that happened in early 2021 between Facebook and Apple, where Facebook flipped out the world because Apple flipped out Facebook. So the whole reason that happened was because Facebook did not have access to information that it was very used to having access to. And they weren't really good at measuring the trends and patterns either. Their system wasn't set up for that. They were sort of brute forcing everything as well. They've since changed that. You see things like conversion modeling coming in to Facebook. You see conversion modeling coming into Google Ads. Technically, it's coming into platforms like Google Analytics 4. So people are getting used to trends and patterns of taking samples of audiences and taking those samples and then extrapolating out from that tiny little sample size what the majority is going to do. That's trends and patterns. That's what all these platforms are doing. All of them are doing this now. Well, in order to extract a sample size, they need quality data. They need quality. And this is where your tag manager coming in and saying, okay, here's who I want to talk to. Not just anybody who saw the cart and left, because that's a very generic sort of thing. And Facebook can't really do too much with that. It's super generic. It's tough for it to build a lookalike of any quality when that could be anything that caused that. Could have been any type of conversation. But I don't want anybody who would come to my cart and abandon and create lookalike audiences or whatever out of that. I want somebody specifically who considered the offer, maybe started filling out the cart. I want people like that. I want people who are having a very specific conversation with my page. Again, this is what Tag Manager is for. Tag Manager helps to make sure you've got your first-party data, especially if you're using server-side. But more importantly, even more important than first-party data, which still is important, but more important is the quality of the data, because that quality directly feeds these other platforms coming through. So we see Facebook all of a sudden gets a better version of a retargeting audience because the quality data that Tag Manager is able to send to it, which is why you want to use Tag Manager when you come to retargeting. Now, a lot of this is going to come into the plans, because the plan is where you really want to think about your customer journey, right? So if I come into, let's pull up Google Analytics for a second. Sorry, our page for a second. So at measuremarketing.io, helpful tip, by the way, all of you should be doing this. Make sure you UTM yourself so you can see test traffic coming through. You can filter out yourself coming through when you're doing things like this. So always make sure this is a habit. But if I come through and I want to retarget somebody who's gone to the academy, I can, with Tag Manager, the whole point of the retargeting is I don't want to see people who just go to the cart and leave, because how did they get to the cart? Why did they get to the cart? Right? Did they come through, actually spend time showing interest in this particular offer? Did they actually investigate the offer for long enough that I wanted them to investigate it? And then did they click on the button to go to the cart and start to continue the journey, as in fields being filled out, right? So we're going to show this for just a brief second. So if the order form pops up here, again, crisscrossing domains, again, things that Tag Manager is really good at. And this is definitely more on my computer, I think, loading up than it is Infusionsoft, where I would have words with Infusionsoft. So here we have the billing information. If I start coming into these fields and I start popping through different details and then I leave, then I exit, I can measure for that sort of behavior. So imagine the quality that I can now go tell Facebook. Oops, let me go back. So if I'm here, if I can go back to our Lucid chart and I say, Facebook, I need you to go target people who are filling out the order form, but then stopped filling it out, right? They started the checkout process in a real way. Didn't just see the page, because that is easy, but that's brute force. And that's not what I want. I want to talk specifically to people who were interrupted by something. Now, my interruption message of, hey, did something get in the way? Hey, that is a reason. Here's these cart things you left, you got these things, still get free shipping for 12 hours or whatever. Like all of that stuff is a reason to continue the journey. They were already had some sort of reason to continue, right? Again, we don't know every single reason. I get that, but it's certainly better than saw the page and left and didn't purchase, right? I have a much more specific behavior. That's very, very different than sometimes what I'll see in e-commerce stores. Somebody will come to the page, they'll start the checkout process because they don't know shipping. And they want to know if they can get shipping, how much shipping is going to be, because it's not listed anywhere. So they'll figure out their cart, they'll go to shipping, they'll be like, nope, shipping's not going to work. You can measure for that behavior, right? The idea is to measure for that sort of behavior. Did they see shipping and as soon as that happened, they left after a few seconds, or did they continue the journey after that? Because if they continued their journey after that, maybe shipping wasn't such an objection. But if they left as soon as shipping showed up, maybe it's time for a little shipping coupon to be pushed through. How would the platform know that? It'll know that because you'll tell it that, because you're going to use Tag Manager to measure for those sort of behaviors. And that's the whole point of today's lesson, is to help you sort of take retargeting and think way beyond saw the cart but didn't purchase, which is how we were all taught retargeting. Me too. I've done the same thing. I get it. But that has led us to where we are now with the 3 mega storms of tech changing with third-party cookies. It's going to be harder to tell who's doing what. Can't rely on the algorithms of Facebook and Google Ads because they're not going to have the information. And if they have it, they're not going to be able to share it. So that's going to happen. Data is definitely going in the hands of the users versus the companies now. Making sure that we have the users, or the other superstorm, right? Using browsers like Brave and things like that. Not all things can be measured. Not every single user journey will you be able to measure. And what if you can't do that? If that's completely dark here, modeling comes in. Facebook will model that for you. Google Ads will model that for you. Google Analytics 4 will model that stuff for you. But how does it model? It models because it has quality data coming in. So all of these predictive metrics, this AI, this machine learning stuff that they're all talking about that they can do, that is directly related to how good that data is that is feeding those algorithms, all that machine learning stuff that's coming in. So the better you are at describing different reasons people did not buy, the better messages you can give them for retargeting, the better the models are going to get, right? And then of course, that's going to make everything better for you overall. You're not just having some weird generic message of did life get in the way type emails. Nothing wrong with those. But if you knew that life got in the way, that's a much more relevant headline than, hey, were you just scanning things and bored at work? Because that's another behavior you can kind of measure for something like that. They don't spend a lot of time on the pages, not really looking. They're not really considering a purchase. Why bug them a million different ways to buy something? Instead, you should try to get them interested in stuff. Get them interested. Then get them to buy the stuff that they were interested in, that showed some sort of interest. But you can change all the messages. So again, in lesson 2, we will talk in great detail about planning out these different processes and give you a little framework that you can use to go through it. For this particular lesson, all I want for you is just to go like, okay, I didn't think about retargeting like that. I didn't realize retargeting in the old days had consequences, but it certainly is one of the biggest reasons that we're here now because of that, because people misused it, they brute forced it, and they put it out everywhere, and they never turned it off, and nobody was setting up kill pixels, nobody turned it off ever. I'm still, and this is cliche, but I am still getting targeted with shoes that I looked at a shoe store site, at an online site, I don't know, 4 months ago now. And it was at a shoe store. I just wanted to know about the brand. But now that company pesters me constantly to buy their shoes. I'm kind of sad I bought them. But I bought them at that store that day. I just wanted to see some reviews. That's it. They could have measured for that, and they would know not to pester me all the time to buy shoes that I have already bought. Now, they would never know I bought those shoes, but they could have told by the behavior what I was there for, right? And it was not to buy shoes from them. It was to learn about shoes. You can measure for those sort of things. But if you don't even think about that, if you don't even realize that's a possibility to do, you won't even try it. And that's what this first lesson is all about, is understanding, okay, we have to rethink what retargeting is. Who are you retargeting? And if you're just thinking abandoned carts, it's too general, way too general. So start thinking about, okay, what are the different behaviors that are happening? What are the different customer journeys that a customer goes through? What are the behaviors in those journeys? And the other huge thing is going to be the amount of data that these platforms need in order to effectively retarget, right? Especially if you're going to be optimizing for something, you're going to need at least 100 different points of retargeting. Well, what if you're a low traffic site? We're a low traffic site. I can't possibly retarget for purchases because we're pretty low traffic. And so we don't have enough purchases coming through where I can go tell Facebook, go find people like our buyers. Now, I get it, the whole Facebook, I get an upload list and whatever else. I get all that. But I'm saying from a pure retargeting standpoint, there's not enough transactions coming through to feed the algorithm what it needs. In other words, it doesn't have the quality data that it needs in order to do its thing. So what I would do is I can say, hey, Facebook, go find people who are interested in our stuff. I can push it up funnel a little bit because I can measure for that behavior. And because I know my numbers and I know trends and patterns, because I know measurement, like you will know measurement if you don't already, is that I will be able to forecast, okay, well, if I get 100 people interested, I know 30 of them are going to end up buying, right? And I can tell Facebook to go find those 100 people because I can retarget for that specific behavior of interest, right? So I can move it up channel as well. And again, we'll show you examples of that as we go through. All right, so with that, we're going to wrap up topic number 2, the tools, and then we're going to do a very quick review of the entire lesson as we wrap up lesson number 1. We'll see you there. When Google Tag Manager Retargeting wraps up with a review of the first lesson, Retargeting Foundations. Remember, the whole goal was to keep this very, very generic and just change how you think about retargeting, or at least open up just a smidge how you think about retargeting. So we talked about, obviously, that first topic, we think of retargeting. It's all about behaviors, but it's not generic behaviors. It's not abandoned cart. It's the real conversation that's happening. And these behaviors that are going on, they reveal the conversation. So if I had a behaviors of, oh, they saw the cart page and then they left, they didn't purchase, let's say that. They saw the cart page and they didn't purchase, I don't know what the conversation was there. That's too generic of a behavior for me to effectively say, well, what's the objection? Was it too much? Was shipping too high? Was it not going to be here soon enough? Did I just decide it wasn't going to be it? Did I decide the reviews weren't good enough? No idea. So how am I supposed to possibly tell Facebook to go advertise to them to effectively move them through a conversion, the customer journey, and move them to an ultimate conversion? Can't. But if I measure for it, if I measure for this different conversation, I absolutely could. I can manage it like an actual salesperson. And the website, my marketing in this case, would change to adjust to keep the conversation going in the direction that I want it to. Now, the tools we talked about, Google Tag Manager, right, collects all those behaviors. That's the one we're going to be using for everything. You should be already through, just to emphasize this again, WI.N Google Tag Manager Basics, and you should already have some experience with WI.N Google Tag Manager Beyond Basics. You should be doing some of the more advanced stuff, because unless you know those things, the stuff we're going to talk about here, you may not be able to do, right? You may not have those tactics yet, because this is not a course on how to use Tag Manager. It's a course on a strategy for using your Tag Manager skills that you should already have. So I just want to emphasize that. So make sure that you have that in mind. And remember, the ad platforms are also at play here. Now, of course, we're not going to show you how to use Facebook. We're not going to show you how to use Google Ads, other than finding the pixel stuff. But even that changes, every 4 months, it seems like, where they hide all this stuff. So it's not about how to use those platforms, but it's about how to give them what they need. Because they will do amazing jobs at certain things, but they need quality results, and they need enough of those quality results to actually feed their machine learning and the AI. And you're going to have to start to think, how are you going to work with modeling? Because modeling is the future. Because we're not going to be able to measure every single person every single time. And everybody got very used to that, but that is not the world that we are living in now, and it's certainly not the world as it will continue to grow. Less people will be measured today than you measured yesterday. And in the future, a year from now, you'll be able to measure less. And a year from then, you'll be able to measure less. And the only reason it's not a nightmare scenario is because you're going to understand trends and patterns, and you're going to understand that you don't need to measure every single person to find a useful truth, to find the trends and patterns that you need, to be able to listen to the story, listen to the conversation. As you set up your retargeting, you're going to future-proof yourself with all of this. That's the entire point of this. And of course, giving quality signals, because you're not brute forcing everything. You're not just kind of giving it these generic results. You're giving it very quality results. The platforms will love you because they will actually have information they can do something with. And your versions of the machine learning stuff will come through with better results than somebody else's will. Somebody else is going to get nice generic information back. You're going to get results back because you fed in decent results. It used to be a programming term back in the day when I was first learning AppleSoft Basic. That is how old I am. And it was garbage in, garbage out. Right? GIGO. So if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage back out. When it comes to retargeting, it's the same thing. You put generic in, you're going to get generic out. But we don't want generic. We want something specific. We want something that's going to move the conversation forward. That is why we need to rethink our targeting. So your next steps. Examine your customer journeys. Remember, every journey is a conversation. There's always more than one conversation. There's always more than one journey. It's not just a specific product or service that you have. There's a journey for your brand they're going through. There's a journey, of course, for specific products they're going through or specific services. But all these customer journeys are happening. There are various conversations that are happening, and they're all intertwined. But look at your site. Look at whether it's a client site or your own site, and think about all those different conversations that are happening. What are the different behaviors? How would you know they are having conversation A versus conversation B? How would you know that they are kind of generically interested in this because their friend told them versus, oh, I'm looking to buy today? Because there's different behaviors that'll happen. What would those behaviors be? Just think about that right now. You don't need to do anything with it, but just as a thought experiment. What behaviors are making up all those different steps? And think about the behaviors they're taking on the site. Somebody that's looking at a product detail page and leaves versus looks at a product detail pages, clicks on the images, spends some time looking at the reviews, right? There's differences there. So that's what you want to think about. Then examine the tools that you are currently using. Remember, this requires Tag Manager. So if you are not using Tag Manager yet, I honestly do not think this course is ready for you to even go through the rest of it, because none of it will make sense. You need to understand Tag Manager. You need to be already using Tag Manager. You don't have to have server side, but you do have to be using the web version of Tag Manager, and you should be through the basics, the WI.N Google Tag Manager Basics and WI.N Google Tag Manager Beyond Basics. You want to make sure that through both of those. But remember, you do not require server-side. That is a nice to have. It is something that costs money and a substantial amount more in terms of resources that you're going through. So larger companies could use that. And eventually you might move into server-side and all these rules will still be applied, but you don't have to have it. Just want to emphasize that. It's a nice to have. You don't have to have it. And we will be showing both. So we're going to show mostly we're going to focus on the web version of Tag Manager because everything sort of starts at the web. And we will show some stuff in terms of setting it up with server-side if you happen to be using that already. But again, the key to this is not how to set up a trigger. It's what should that trigger be? That's where so much of this is. And that's why we're going to spend the first couple of lessons in this course going through the thought experiments, going through the planning, because that's where the change is. It's not on setting up a click trigger. It's why that click trigger and what is that behavior representing and what does that mean in the conversation and how do I keep that conversation going if it did get abandoned? All right, so that's the idea, thinking about how you can go through the signal quality, how you can feed the ad platforms better signals so they can help you find the people that you want to find and move them along in their journey. And with that, you've just completed lesson number 1, Retargeting Foundations. Coming up next, lesson number 2, we're going to move into building a retargeting plan. Again, we're going to give you a framework and a tool that you can use to actually pencil this stuff out, think it through, come up with the different behaviors, and then think about how it's going to translate in the world of Tag Manager. And then we'll move on to actually setting up it in Facebook, show you the Facebook template and how to some tricks with that. And then we'll do it with Google Ads with the same thing, show you some tricks on Google Ads in lesson number 4. And then lesson number 5, of course, we'll wrap it all up with figuring out like how is this actually working and you're actually getting the results you want to when we dive into the reporting phase of things. With that, we'll officially bring this one to a close. Thanks for watching W.I.N GTM Retargeting. We will see you on the next lesson. Take care. All right, so Q&A, and I realize this is a very generic first lesson, so sometimes we've got questions, sometimes not. But if anybody has them, you can either raise your hand and then I will unmute you, or you can pop them in chat if you have any questions in chat. Happy to address them. I'll give a few seconds for anybody that's in chat. Typically, the lesson ones don't have a ton of questions because everyone's kind of like, all right, where is this going? I am sure they will pop up as we get into the details of Facebook. But I know one question people had was, are we going to talk about server-side? Yes, we will show server-side examples because I think now's the time, especially because now you can do it with Google Ads where you couldn't a couple months back. All right, I don't see any questions coming in, so we will officially wrap this one up. Of course, oh, sorry, we got one coming in. Ron is asking, so if I'm not that invested in GTM, I shouldn't follow this. I would definitely it depends what that means. That's a perfect example of I don't know because I'm not sure what that means. But if you are not through and comfortable with what is taught in W.I.N Google Tag Manager Beyond Basics, then I would say yes. This is more, you go through W.I.N Google Analytics Basics first, you go through W.I.N Google Tag Manager Basics, W.I.N Google Tag Manager Beyond Basics, and you're practicing as you go. It's always important to ride the bike. But assuming you've gone through both of those, this is a good natural third one to come through. But you should go through the first 2 because you're going to learn a bunch of tricks in those 2 as you practice that will make this one more useful. And we're not going to go through and teach how to use Tag Manager in this one. We'll just assume everybody knows it. So that's why it is. And that's exactly. So as you're saying you're going through Beyond Basics now, I would go through that and finish that first before you come to this. The only other thing I would say, if you wanted to, just because it's taught live and if you want to sort of be in the room when it's being taught, you could think of it as being exposed to the information, but not that you're going to all of a sudden be a retargeting expert by the end of it, type of thing. But you can certainly pay attention. Just I would definitely go through Beyond Basics first. Yeah, makes sense. Perfect. Good question. All right. Yeah, and there's absolutely no problem with just being exposed to this information at this level and just realizing, hey, I'm not going to be an expert in it, but I want to kind of see where it's all going, and I'm in Beyond Basics now, and that'll make Beyond Basics, maybe even make Beyond Basics, more fun because you're like, I know where I'm going next. And then when you rewatch this, you'll pick up a bunch of other stuff that'll be there, or some of it will just make more sense because you have your skills. Thank you for that one, Ron. All right, I don't see any other questions, comments, concerns, so I think we can officially wrap this one up. So with that, we'll bring W.I.N GTM Retargeting lesson number 1 to a close. We will see everybody for lesson number 2 again at this exact same time tomorrow, and we will see you there. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.